Cool. All right, Mark. Well, I reckon we can probably get things kicked off. So I'll throw it over to you. Again, not sure how many people have been in a webinar that you and I have been on for the Academy. So if you just want to maybe give yourself a quick intro, and then we can kind of kick things off. And I'll, as always, be lurking in the background, and I'll pop up towards the end.
Sounds great. Awesome. Hey, welcome, guys. I'm excited to chat today. In terms of, this is probably the fourth webinar I've done with the Everfit Academy, and I've just loved every opportunity to speak. Today's talk is going to be a little bit different. The ones in the past that I've done have been a bit more on like the application of nutrition coaching and how to get started and some of the processes that I've used to get paying clients. I have a PhD in human nutrition, and I've been definitely involved in the research world, but the last 12 years have focused specifically on working with one-on-one nutrition clients in an online capacity, a lot of body recomposition, athletic performance, and that type of stuff, but also focused in the business development side. So that's a little bit about me. I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, with my beautiful wife, Amy, and my two young kids. And I just love everything about nutrition, fitness, training. I'm excited to chat with you guys today about some of the popular diets that are out there and what the science says and what actually works. A few things, just housekeeping as well. We are going to have time for questions at the end. So if you, by all means, drop them in the chat, and I'll make sure to address it at the end. And if it's not anything that like takes me too far away from what I'm talking about, I'll work it into my webinar here today as well. Last thing, you may have noticed that in the past, we've been to a past webinar, our 90-day certification was previously the Dr. Marc method. We've had some changes in the last little bit. It's got a facelift and an upgrade. So if you're seeing some of the Nutrition Coaching Academy stuff, that's the explanation around that. We've got a brand new program. Let's dive into things though here. Let me know if this situation sounds familiar. I'm going to set the scene for a second. I know many of you are trainers and coaches working with clients, but maybe if you're just getting into this, I can imagine you've had these type of conversations with people in your social circle, friends, family, that type of stuff. But if you're a coach or trainer, you're already working with a client. Maybe they're doing well on the training side of things. They know that they have like a weight loss goal, and they know something needs to change. Progress isn't happening as quickly as they'd like, and they've heard from someone in their social circle or somewhere online. They come across a brand new diet that they want to try. And the scenario is, how do we talk to them about that? Like, what does the science say about this? Will it actually work? Is it necessary? Does it do what it claims and purports to do? As well as, like, is it going to fit in their life, or is it going to be another one of those things that's just a flash in the plan, not entirely necessary, and it's just going to set them up to rebound or not really change in the way that they need to? So we go into these scenarios thinking those type of things, and they're asking us about what we think. But as I mentioned before, I have found, after having worked with thousands of nutrition clients, right around 2,100, usually when people come to us with these type of questions and thoughts, many times they're already committed to doing it, and they're not really looking to you for guidance as much as they are looking for approval, that you're like, thumbs up, you should do this. So it's kind of a tricky situation around how do we navigate what the science says and if they should be doing it, or some combination of that. And, with the right coaching approach and coaching software, you can definitely navigate that as well, especially if you know the underlying science of why someone will get a result and why they'll improve. But then how do we actually keep them on track, fill in some of the gaps that maybe the popular diet could be missing, but still also deliver on results, and most importantly, what they want to do, right? I think that might be a big theme here around today's webinar. It's that it's very tough to convince people otherwise. It's almost a fruitless endeavor at times. And that's not like a low carb joke. It's just one of those things that convincing people to go about things a different way when they're already pretty certain that they want to do something is not usually the best approach. And I'll talk to you about some of the strategies to be able to go through that today. Now, today's webinar, I already introduced myself and gave you a sense of that. And it's so nice to be here. But what I want you to take away from this this webinar today is to be able to confidently coach clients following some of the popular diets. And we're going to go over some of the most popular ones today. They're coming up in a second here, but we're going to talk about the ketogenic diet. We're going to talk about intermittent fasting. There's differences in these already in terms of like how they're conducted and what they focus on, what they include, what they exclude, as well as plant forward or vegan diets and a tracking based approach. So we're going to go through those scenarios so that you have the information to confidently coach people through these type of things. Also understand the science of why these diets work and how they're set up, and apply real world strategies that get clients results. As well as, and just as importantly, I think sometimes we just need the words and thought processes around how to talk about these scenarios with people and how to have conversations with them so they can choose what's right for them with our support and with our guidance, and see why it's in their best interest or not, and not just follow the latest trend. So that's what we're going to dive into today. You guys ready? In terms of some of the other things you'll learn today, pros, cons, pros and pitfalls, and the science behind some of the more trending diets right now. We've polled you guys in the past around what you hear from people, and here are the 4 most common: keto, intermittent fasting, plant-based diets, including veganism and the differences between vegan, vegetarian, and maybe just more plant-forward eating, as well as a tracking-based approach, which is called various different things on the World Wide Web. Sometimes flexible dieting or tracking-based approach. Sometimes if it fits your macros, what does that mean? So we're going to go over those. We're also going to address gaps, maybe some of the things that people might not be able to do forever, as well as if that's a bad thing, and some of the mindset issues that can derail progress. How to guide productive, informed conversations so clients can make the best decision for them based on the actual evidence and not just what everyone else out there is saying. And then coaching strategies that no matter what this person chooses, you can use to make customized solutions and not just follow some of the black and white rules of the diet, blanket-based statements that many of these popular things fit into. Okay. You guys ready to rock? Let's first talk about the ketogenic diet. Interestingly enough, there's many different versions of the ketogenic diet, as well as lower carb approaches. In its essence, the keto diet, and I think when it was first created, was used as a medical-based therapy for different like epileptic groups and like different brain type things. But it's been popularized in body composition circles and as a way to manage insulin levels and some of the things that come along with being overweight. In reality, though, it's not just about being low carb. It's really about being moderate to high fat, and definitely on the higher fat end. And sometimes that is at the expense of less protein, and not just epileptic reach you, and not just like super low carb, high protein, and high to moderate fat that we know in many low carb diets. The goal of ketogenic diet is going to be to shift your body into the state of ketosis and using ketones and fat as fuel, as opposed to glucose as the primary source. And typically what this looks like in terms of a macronutrient composition on a daily basis is around 60 to 80% fat, sometimes 10 to upwards of 30% protein, and a lot of times be on the lower end of that protein. And it could be not enough for some people that are, doing resistance training and looking to improve their body composition, and then very low carbs, between 5 to 10% of carbohydrates. So when you're thinking about that low carb number, generally you're going to have to exclude some things to fit into those parameters. What it looks like in many cases in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed: restricted foods, whole grains and grains, rice, oats, quinoa, a lot of fruit, especially ones that are higher in carbohydrate and higher in sugar, like bananas and apples. Sometimes people will work in some lower carb veggies as well as some lower carb fruits, but we'll talk about that in a second, as well as anything that's overly processed and some variations of dairy. Like a lot of times, some people will be able to get away with cheese on those numbers and that type of stuff, but anything that is higher in lactose and has quite a bit of dairy-based sugar, like milk, that type of thing can be excluded. In terms of encouraged foods, olive oil, avocado, nuts, seeds, butter, those are some of the healthier fat sources. If you spend any time on Reddit or even Facebook groups, I'm not a part of a lot of these groups, but sometimes they get pushed at you. There's like, versions of dirty keto and people like just eating bacon and eating like more processed sources of higher fat, moderate protein foods. But there's better and worse versions to approach this stuff. Protein sources, lower carb veggies, as I had mentioned, and then higher fat dairy in terms of like higher fat cheese, cream, whipping cream, those type of things. Generally, a lot of like unsweetened beverages, water, coffee, and tea that doesn't have like just steep tea that doesn't have any sugar in it. Those are kind of like the food choices that accompany many ketogenic diets. As you can start to see with these two different lists here, number one, when there's a clear line between like what you can eat and what you can't eat in the short term, for some people, it might be easier to follow, right? It's like one of those things where I can't do this. I can do this. It's black or white. There's pros and cons of everything. For some people, the black and white nature of it might be helpful at the beginning, but setting them up with the educational principles around eating healthy and what they need to do to maintain a result can be difficult because they're not seeing why a result happened as opposed to just following kind of the black and white nature of this. So that's what's in, what's out in terms of the keto diet. When we start to think about, well, what does it produce? In some cases, if someone starts to go on a diet where they can do this and can't do this, and they cut out a bunch of food that was putting them in a long-term caloric surplus, they might make some changes that allow them to lose weight because now they're in a calorie deficit, especially early on. If we're thinking about just scale weight, there's going to be many changes that happen at the beginning of a ketogenic diet, namely carbohydrate going much down in the diet, and therefore glycogen stores coming down as well. We store quite a bit of water along with a gram of glycogen. So the scale weight would come down quite rapidly, but it's not always just fat loss. But that's one of those things where, people going on these things see that and associate it with progress, which some of it will be fat, but not necessarily, and not all of it will be fat. Some of it will be water. Generally, if we're cutting out a bunch of processed foods, especially more sugar-based foods and sweets and that type of stuff, you might have improved blood sugar control, as well as, and we're going to talk about later on, we could get similar things cutting out processed foods and not being as restrictive. But generally, if you're doing that and getting leaner and improving someone's body weight, generally they're going to have some improved blood sugar control, as well as if you eat more protein and more fat, you're going to have increased satiety. So it can help someone stay fuller. And as we mentioned earlier, generally, and this isn't probably talked about as much, if there's simple rules around what someone can follow, it might be associated with better compliance, especially at the beginning. A lot of times, some of these more science-heavy approaches, we'll talk about later in terms of tracking-based stuff, can be tougher to educate on and tougher to explain and tougher to systemize, as opposed to just do this and don't do that. And that's why there would be, if we can explain the science-heavier stuff in a more rules-based approach, especially at the beginning, maybe it makes it easier to comply to. So that could be, a benefit for some. As well as if you cut out a bunch of food options, many of which would be involved in our choices of eating out and those type of things. Maybe people cook more of their own food, which could be a positive thing, right? The more control you have over that, the more you're improving your food skills. That could be one of those things that's helpful as well. In terms of red flags and limitations, in most cases, we've cut out generally an entire food group, or at least macronutrient group, when it comes to bringing the carbs down so heavily. And therefore, in most cases, fiber intake is decreased. This is one of the craziest things about social media and social media trends. Obviously, there's versions of this that we haven't talked about the carnivore diet yet today. But one of those things where, hey, if you're not eating any fiber at all, many people are saying, well, I still am having normal bowel movements and I'm not noticing many changes that way. Do I really need fiber? At the same time, this isn't, I mean, causation or anything, but we're seeing, so many higher rates of colon cancer and gastrointestinal diseases, as well as, some of these trends and that type of stuff. And in so many cases, we have population-based data to support that fiber is actually a good thing. I mean, we don't digest it. We do utilize some of it as energy, as short chain fatty acids in our colon, but that's a good thing. And it's one of those things where it can definitely help promote positive benefits in your gut as opposed to negative ones. As well as, in some cases, people will become constipated if they don't have enough fecal bulk that comes from some of the undigested fiber to produce bowel movements. So just keep that in mind. Generally, an acceptable level of dietary fiber in the diet is 14 grams for every 1,000 calories consumed. It's one of the few nutrients that recommendations are based on the amount of food you eat as opposed to your body weight or requirements. And that's because we need a certain amount of fiber to produce healthy bowel movements in many cases. Now, if you also additionally cut out a whole food group and a whole nutrient group, you're more, in some cases, you're going to be more susceptible to nutrient deficiencies, especially micronutrients like the electrolytes magnesium and potassium and vitamin C. And then there's also like an adaptation phase that may not be worth it for many people. When they're making this adjustment, it's kind of defined as the keto flu, when there's some fatigue, nausea, and dizziness as you're adjusting to using more ketones as fuel and reducing some of those carbohydrate foods. Just in terms of practical stuff, there's groups of people that'll do really, really well on this, and there's many that won't. In my experience, it is hard to sustain for a lot of clients, but the clients that do have good outcomes and do enjoy it tend to stay on it for a long period of time. We talked about the dirty keto aspect. I think just like anything else, there's going to be good, better, and worse versions of things. And if you just think that this is a green light to eat whatever you want within these rules, like you're not going to be setting yourself up for success. Maybe you'll get results, but that might lead to negative health outcomes down the road. Because like when I say results, I mean, maybe you'll lose weight, but if you're eating only highly processed fat sources and, just things that you don't necessarily need to be eating in terms of like butter, cheese, bacon, and no plants at all. I mean, it's one of those things where that might lead to overconsumption of unhealthy fats, or just one of those scenarios where you're eating tons of, like you can eat tons of processed gluten-free food. You can eat tons of processed keto-based food. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be health promoting. So we got to keep that in perspective as well. In terms of who it's for and who it's not for, some of the people that could benefit from this, someone with that's developed some sort of insulin resistance or it's pre-diabetic. Generally, if someone comes to me and they already prefer higher fat, low carb food, they feel like they feel good on it. They feel like it works for them and has worked for them in the past. Personally, that's not the hill I'm going to die on, getting them to eat higher carb. Like, why would we, within the principles of what we'll know that works? It doesn't mean calories are absolutely useless and there's no structure to things, but we got to think about where they're coming from and how they're going into this scenario. Maybe motivated and detail orientated clients that are already feeling like they can navigate this stuff, and maybe clients that want to lose more weight than we typically would see on a calorie focused approach. They want a more rapid weight loss from the beginning. Now, people that enjoy a wide variety of foods and are looking for more variety and something that's more sustainable, this is probably not a good fit. People that struggle with rigid food rules, maybe they eat out a lot socially, this is going to be something that's difficult for them to navigate. Some people that aren't ready for, a dietary overhaul or big changes within their nutrition, as well as, I mean, there's some case reports of endurance-based athletes playing around with higher fat days and carb cycling and that type of stuff. But generally, most will do much better on higher levels of carbohydrate throughout their training and performance. So those athletes that rely on like fast sources of energy and mixed sports, as well as like explosive sports, but even endurance sports as well. in terms of like, hey, someone wants to go on this, and what do we do to address some of the gaps? In many cases, I think many people could do really well on, I would say, a lower carb, higher fat, moderate protein approach that still includes some of the foods that are deemed like off limits in a lot of cases on some ketogenic diets. To me, the power of this stuff is just being much more aware of what you're eating and not necessarily saying I'm doing keto or having the, a set amount of ketones to burn as fuel. Which means if you could include leafy greens and low carb veggies and maybe some lower sugar fruit within that and stay within a set amount of calories and do well, like that's what I would suggest, because that way you'll be increasing your fiber and some different micronutrients that'll be helpful for overall health as well as electrolytes. And then also keep it tabs on fat quality in terms of some of those fat sources are coming from a wide variety of animal-based sources, but also plant-based sources to make sure you're getting essential fatty acids and kind of going from there. In terms of coaching strategies, I like to keep a close eye on tracking, biofeedback in terms of how someone's adjusting to things, their energy levels, digestion, sleep. Anissa says, would you suggest a powdered fiber supplement? Absolutely. I think that's a great idea, especially if, and this is what I'm going to get to in a second, if just because they're following one of these diets doesn't mean that they can't be tracking the foods that they're eating and us getting a sense of where the macronutrients are coming from and if there are any gaps. That's the best way for us to actually manage how these things are looking and seeing if they need something like a fiber supplement. So if they're having digestive issues and they're not getting enough fiber, that's exactly the reason why we would include a supplemental source, especially of fiber. So keeping that stuff in mind as well. If we can manage those things, we can also adjust their protein and carbohydrate and macros as needed. Just because they're on keto doesn't mean it needs to be super low protein. And someone that's doing some resistance training could benefit from more protein as well on the higher end of those ranges that could keep them in ketosis or not, depending on what they want. We can also reinforce flexible thinking. I think one of the things that the fitness industry gets wrong a lot of times is that we think that people that are doing things, that they're signing up for things, they're signing up for it forever, and it has to be forever. It has to be their last way of eating. Personally, I think both on a, philosophical level, but also just beliefs, like people can try different things and go down the path and see what sticks and what doesn't, and do versions of it through time. I think we get so wrapped up into, someone's going to do this challenge-based things for 30 days. And since it's just 30 days, they're not going to stick with it forever. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Not everything needs to be forever, and maybe being more flexible around their thinking going into this type of stuff it can be helpful. And then got to prepare clients for social situations or setbacks when they're going into some of the scenarios where they might not have their normally available food, or how to think about things differently and how to prepare. Those are some of the things that we need to start thinking about. Okay, before we move on to the other 3 styles of popular diets we'll talk about today, I do want to think about and start to, introduce how we have confident, non-biased conversations about diets with our clients, because I think that's what's going to really set you guys up for success around getting people to do things that stick, shifting beliefs, and not always feeling like we have to convince people to do things and pulling heavy boulders up hills that they want to push down against you. So let's talk about that. Before you advise, I think one of the best things you can do in these conversations is start with curiosity and not just correct what they're saying, not just give advice, not just go down that path right away. So when someone says to you, yeah, things just aren't going as well as I thought. My sister-in-law is doing the ketogenic diet. I'm going to try that. Instead of being like, don't do that, which probably isn't going to work because they're considering it already. Maybe they're pretty committed to it. Start with curiosity around like, what made you interested in the keto diet? Tell me more about your sister-in-law's experience and what she's saying. Then we can get a sense of like why they're doing it, right? Their why is our leverage around the entire conversation. And if we know their why, we can start to present both the pros and cons of going down this path so they can come up with an informed decision. I think the biggest thing being like, hey, someone's like, well, progress isn't as fast as I would like. I'd like to lose a little bit more weight. Then we can have a conversation around like, hey, totally. Well, doing the ketogenic diet might help with that, especially if you're able to stay, in a calorie deficit. But keep in mind, you haven't been able to do this yet. Keep in mind, you may be overlooking this. Keep in mind that this might not be the best approach for these reasons. Have you considered that? When you present things that way, people are going to see, number one, why it's in their best interest to do it or not to do it, as well as come to that decision on their own instead of just being led. You as the coach and the trainer and the expert, there are times and places to be prescriptive and to tell people to do certain things. But in some of these exploratory conversations, if you enter it with curiosity and then present the facts in a way that they can see why they should be doing it, you're going to be in a much better place. Then we can do things like, hey, if they're going to go down this path, we can start to align it with their lifestyle and get them thinking about what's going to work in the short term as well as the long term. What elements are you going to carry? Like, are you going to keep with you within this approach moving forward? Like, what's what's been helpful for you? What can you continue to do? And can you see yourself sticking to certain aspects of this? And then from that point, it's just all about coaching the person in front of you and not the diet. I think that the thing about the diets is that people start to tend to fall into camps and want to follow things exactly. And that's how we work as humans at times, like, we're in groups and that kind of stuff. And then, even if it's not the thing that, we had Rob say at the beginning, I'm very pro meat. I love eating meat. And when people presented, veganism to me or eating more plants, it just didn't jive with me. Even if it's not your go-to to go down that path, you can still help them succeed and then kind of go from there. Why I think this matters is that it's not your job to convince them to do something different. And that, honestly, I've spent so much time, especially in the early parts of my career, arguing on the internet would be the first thing, debating different aspects of science. You don't convince people that way. People are pretty set in their ways. And this is similar with people that are also coming to us. Like, our job isn't to convince them to do things otherwise. It's to clarify what matters the most and what matters the least, and to guide them to better health outcomes. So you can provide facts and set realistic expectations. And even if they're going down a path that you don't necessarily 100% agree with, you can still set. Oh, I think I got booted there for a second. I'm back though. I don't know what that was about. In many cases, and just let me know if you guys can hear me again, in many cases, they're going to try this with or without you. And it's better that they do it with your guidance. This is a bit of I've seen many scenarios. I spent so much time working with weight class athletes, specifically powerlifters and Olympic weightlifters and 2-hour weight class sports. That was definitely my niche at the beginning. And I'd have so many people to me coming into these situations saying like, hey, I want to cut weight for this meet in 2 weeks. Like, what should I do? In a lot of those scenarios, it probably, like, they don't need to be cutting weight. They don't need to be making a lower weight class. They'd probably be in a better situation, just lifting as is and fueling their body and that type of stuff. But for whatever reason, both, motivation wise and both, they want to do it. And so many times they're going to do it with or without you. So it's a good idea to get a sense of their why and their motivation and lead them down on that path based on, best practices that you can still instill in them down that path. If you don't help them figure it out, someone on TikTok is going to, or they're going to follow that path. So we kind of got to strike that balance. Also, there's pros and cons of all of this stuff. And although the diet might not be perfect, this starting point might be the thing that they need to get them to see the next step or why it's in their best interest. And again, it doesn't need to be forever. Okay, in terms of intermittent fasting here, this will be the next one. This is going to be a little bit different in terms of, my slides are going a little crazy. I don't know what's going on there. In terms of a different approach, obviously fasting cycles are going to be different than excluding certain food groups or following, a diet with the intent of producing more ketones and using that as energy. So it's going to be one of those things where intermittent fasting, and we tend to fast overnight in most cases, unless you're waking up and eating food and then back in a postprandial cycle. But we tend to fast overnight. This is extending that fasting cycle through different approaches, cycles of eating and not eating. Instead of avoiding certain foods or including certain foods, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern and not necessarily a food restriction plan in the same way that a lot of other popular diets are. Some of the most popular styles of intermittent fasting, the lean gains approach of a 16-hour fast and an 8-hour eating window is probably one of the most popular ones. But we've also seen in research that alternate day fasting, eating one day and then fasting the next, has also become much more popular, and I would say much tougher to navigate practically as well, in research, but also out there in the general public. So in terms of red flags and limitations, in terms of evidence-based benefits, we've educated people forever not to think about restricting certain types of foods. And on an intermittent fasting plan, you don't necessarily need to. It also, if you have less food decisions to make and meals to plan, it simplifies that process. So that can be helpful for a lot of people. There's no magic to, especially as the way the evidence looks right now, there's no magic to intermittent fasting in many cases. If eating in a restricted time window allows someone to better manage the amount of calories that are coming in, that is going to be the difference maker. It can be really good for a lot of people to just manage the amount of calories coming in through restricting their food window. And if that leads to weight loss, that is going to be the reason why. Through that process, better food choices and potentially less food overall. There's a bit of diet quality as well as diet quantity going on here that might improve their blood sugar control and better regulate their appetites. The flip side is that can be tough to do as well in terms of regulating your appetite, because there's a tough transition phase. As well, if you don't have to make as many food decisions, that might help reduce food decision fatigue and constantly wondering what to eat or making the right decision. In terms of things that we got to be cautious of and maybe some limitations, the transition phase can be tough. I remember a lot of my love for this stuff, I was born out of the 2008, 2009, almost like discussion boards on bodybuilding.com and tnation.com. I remember so many of us bought into the notion that you needed to eat more frequent meals. Meal timing was really big to stoke the metabolic fire. And I remember when the lean gains approach and intermittent fasting started to get a little bit more popular in 2010, 2011, just being completely blown away that we didn't necessarily need to carry Tupperware around with us everywhere and be completely glued into a clock to have to eat every 3 hours. And I remember starting thinking like, maybe I can just delay breakfast and that could be helpful. For many people, the transition phase right to flat out fasting for 16 hours can be way too much. It depends on where they're at and what they typically do. In terms of why people see progress on this, it has nothing to do with, your body has enough time in the fasted cycle to begin with to do a lot of the things in terms of healing itself and cell clearing and that type of stuff that many fasting proponents say is the thing that's going to heal you without eating. We do that generally in most fed and fasted cycles to begin with. If people at this point see good health outcomes, it's typically because of calorie restriction and not anything magical. It's not going to be one of those things that's going to work for everyone, especially from a practical perspective. If there's athletes, someone in a performance sport, or someone trying to gain weight, it could be just really tough to eat enough food within that scenario. As well as, anyone that has a history of an eating disorder and is in a situation where they're not going to eat, that's the stuff that they undo through therapeutic approaches and overcoming some of those things. It's just not going to be a great scenario for them. As well as it can be socially inconvenient for a lot of people that are different jobs, different lifestyles and that type of stuff. Only having a set eating window just might not fit within their overall lifestyle. In terms of who it's for and who it's not, the people that could really benefit from it are people that like structure. They thrive off structure and having a plan, as well as simplicity. Again, within this approach, we're not saying what you can and can't eat, we're saying when you can eat. And therefore, if it's kind of black and white around that, it can be helpful for a lot of people. If you're someone that grew up not hungry in the morning and being told that you need to eat breakfast because it's the most important meal of the day and you have to do it outside of being a growing child with brain development and stuff, you don't need to be eating breakfast. It's not one of those things that like there's no magic to breakfast outside of, if calories are controlled and you're eating enough protein, you can delay that first meal as long as you're taking care of business in the other areas. So if people that are hungry in the morning, might be one of those things where, hey, maybe we delay breakfast, especially if we're busy, and do something differently. Clients trying to lose weight, it's just a great way to manage calories and overall calorie intake. Not a good fit for clients with high training demands or competitive athletes. Generally, it just becomes harder to eat enough food, or those who struggle with hunger to begin with, or low energy. Generally, giving them more opportunities to eat is a helpful thing. Social meals and flexible schedules, there's probably pros and cons to both of that, but generally, people that are just all over the map and their lives are flexible just don't do as well on this level of structure. Maybe they could do well on alternate day fasting though. In terms of considerations and things to address, clients are eating less meals. In some cases, in that 8-hour window, they're only going to eat like 2 larger meals and 1 snack. So each time they do eat, it matters more in terms of the total amount and where it's coming from. So they got to prioritize higher protein meals and higher fiber meals. And there could be gaps based on their food choices in terms of the amount of, they got to stay on top of hydration and still be consuming fluids, even if they're not eating, as well as some of the micronutrient gaps. Again, just because someone's following a specific diet doesn't mean they need to abandon tracking their food entirely, especially with the magic of this stuff isn't just fasting for a set period of time. It's that what fasting allows them to do. So if we still manage the things that matter, they're going to lead to better outcomes. Past the transition phase, if there's way too much fatigue, if there's repeated binging that sets them outside of a calorie limit, there's too much rigidity, we got to watch out for that, as well as, again, reinforcing flexible thinking. Maybe they think, I saw someone on Instagram doing a 60-hour fast. I want to try that. Maybe it's one of those things where we think about, hey, why don't we delay the first meal? See how you do on that. See if that's helpful, and think about doing those things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. Again, I don't think timeframes and challenges are the worst things for a lot of people. They can teach them a lot about what they can do and what they're willing to do, as long as they know there's an exit plan and something that they can continue on for longer periods of time. Now, plant-based diets. Right now, if you spend any time on social media, the middle of being reasonable seems to be disappearing. We have people over here, and even some scientific research to suggest that plant-based diets and the blue zones and even less processed foods are like the best thing that can ever happen to you, and it's going to improve your lifespan, and really sticking to that. And there's some science-based stuff, but as well as ethical reasons and those type of things. And then we have on the other side of things, the completely different dynamic. Plants are going to kill you. Fruits and vegetables are the worst thing ever based on some of the compounds involved in them, as well as you should be eating only animal-based stuff. And it seems like the middle is just disappearing, which to me is crazy. Again, I was talking to Rob at the beginning. If you would have asked me 8 to 10 years ago, what is the one nutritional principle that we can all agree on? I did think eating fruits and vegetables were good for us. And I thought that was the thing that we could all agree on. And it seems to be disappearing, especially on social media. Which brings me to plant-based diets. There's many different versions of plant-based diets. There's people thinking about just being more plant-forward in terms of including more fruits and vegetables, maybe swapping out some animal sources, but not going to the extremes of avoiding them entirely, like they would in a vegan-based diet where they're excluding all animal products, meat, fish, dairy, even honey with the involvement of bees, that type of stuff, as well as in the middle, vegetarian, pesco-vegetarian, different versions of that, not including any animal flesh, but including dairy and eggs, and every combination of those. People are going to choose these type of things based on different reasons, maybe some of the health effects, maybe personal values and ethics. Knowing their why allows us to like find the middle and find where they're coming from, because there's going to be different solutions we can present and different things they can go about it that might be helpful for them as well. Generally, on a plant-based diet, you guys know that based on the amount of protein you can get from plant-based sources, first of all proteins matter. That's an important distinguishable point, even if the amino acid composition is different. But generally, the amount of protein we can get from them is just lower. So making sure that based on those sources, we're eating enough lentils, pulse crops, seitan, even vegan-based protein powders. The actual the rise in plant-based supplements and additional food sources has really risen. So it's making sure that you're covering your bases to eat enough protein, especially if you're training with weights and looking to improve muscle mass as well, and varying those sources. You do in your body. We don't store amino acids in the same way that we store fat and glucose as adipose tissue or glycogen, but we do have an amino acid pool in our body that we can pull from to make sure that we're, synthesizing new proteins and that type of stuff, but generally making sure that you're covering your bases over the course of days with varying sources so that there isn't any amino acid deficiencies, especially the essential amino acids, is a good thing. Just because I remember being in grad school and one of the other graduate students saying, I don't have to watch what I eat because I don't eat meat. And I remember thinking, it doesn't check out at all. You can still be in a calorie surplus. It's tougher to do, but especially some of the more processed carb sources, just because there's no meat involved doesn't mean that you can't be in a calorie surplus, which can lead to weight gain, right? Tougher to do, but it's possible. Other micronutrients to monitor: some of the B vitamins, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, especially some of the more fish-derived ones, obviously, in this case, calcium, creatine, things that are going to come from mainly animal-based sources. There are some workarounds and different considerations. Other coaching strategies that can be helpful: making sure that there's high protein options at every meal, or at least a discernible protein source is important. And a lot of cases, just making sure that you're still emphasizing lower calorie, high volume foods for fat loss clients. And it isn't just avocado and plant-based oils, because those also additionally can add up. Recommending different protein focused grocery lists and meal prep guidance. A lot of times we've come so far in terms of understanding plant-based protein sources, but that is still one of the main concerns to making this, especially on a results-based focus, making it successful. And then within that, just being flexible. My last diet I want to talk about today, we're cruising. This was probably the peak of its popularity as it was known in terms of if it fits your macros. It was probably 2016, but there's still different variations of it now. And the general premise is pretty scientifically sound. So in terms of a flexible dieting approach, most clients will be focused on tracking their nutrition towards individualized targets for calories and macronutrients that are based on their goals. Again, it was popularized in the fitness world for weight management and performance, but generally the general premise is if, especially if it fits your macros, if you were hitting your food targets, you didn't need to worry as much about food quality, because that would be the primary driver of results. Many clients will use some of the more popular tracking apps, MyFitnessPal, Chronometer, Macros First, many of the integrations that are in Everfit to actually manage their nutrition and then go from there. That's how they're going to manage those type of things. Now, in terms of evidence-based benefits, it's generally a good thing that we don't avoid certain foods. Eat what you enjoy based on your personal preferences and just mold that to your individual targets. In most cases, that's a good thing. All of these diets, one of the the commonalities of them all is that if you're focusing on what you're eating, it's going to lead to better outcomes. Most diets promote food awareness, and that's definitely the case here when you're learning more about your food on an objective level. Additionally, when you're controlling for the things that matter the most and not just kind of like wishing that if something will happen, you'll support like fat loss and muscle gain results much more effectively. In many cases, since you can do this long term and a lot of times and eat socially, dining out, including different like sweets, pastries, that kind of stuff into real life, quote unquote real life, it can lead to better outcomes long term. Now, with that being said, just because you're getting to know more about the numbers of your food and objectively what it contributes, it doesn't mean that you should just abandon how your body feels and your appetite and hunger cues overall. That can happen though if you're just focusing just on the numbers. I personally have clients that have tracked for 5, 6, 7 years while monitoring how they feel about things. But for many people, tracking is just an educational tool that'll teach them more about their food and allow them to achieve a result where they can build some habits within that structure to follow through on long term. But if you're stuck to your phone tracking your food for the rest of your life, that can definitely cause burnout. And in most cases, it shouldn't be navigated that way. And if you have too much flexibility, again, in 2016, I don't know, like people didn't eat Pop-Tarts. Adults didn't eat Pop-Tarts for like since they were kids, and then started to work those in instead of other things around training and even breakfast and all that stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. You do still need to eat like, I would say, an adult within reason. But it's one of those things where too much flexibility can lead to poor food choices, as well as anyone that has struggled with a history of eating disorders or even some elements of disordered eating. It can be problematic for them. Now, most of my clients that come to me with a specific result and want to achieve something focused on a timeline, I would say controlling for the variables that matter the most and setting them up on a tracking-based approach, if they're not coming into the scenario thinking I want to try this or that, is the best approach. But even for the clients that want to try keto or something like that, still managing the numbers it makes a lot of sense. And different coaching softwares like Everfit is so good at giving you the tools to be able to manage those things. But regardless of how they're navigating food choices, tracking their food is measurable, gives them awareness around food choices. It helps them build the autonomy that they'll be able to make those choices and build those habits long term, as well as, just because what we teach in our program is that setting the structure is super important around the checks and balances of how much food they need to be eating and where that food comes from. But within that, the art of coaching is giving them the right tools and strategies on an individual basis to build that structure. It doesn't need to be one or the other, and can be really flexible. So that's where we start many of our clients. Some things to consider though, is that again, just because you're tracking doesn't mean that you need to completely avoid nutrient dense foods. You should still be eating them, especially foods that provide volume and satiety. Hunger is going to become an issue if you fill all of your food choices with foods that don't fill you up. From a coaching strategy perspective, many clients don't even know what calories are or what macronutrients are. That doesn't mean that they can't track. If anything, there's probably a case to get them tracking there. Sometimes people say, well, I need a PhD to track my nutrition. I think you need a PhD not to track your nutrition, but they still need to be educated around how to do it. Essentially, they're just taking a food diary, which they could do with pen and paper, but using a piece of technology to log it with serving sizes, to take those food choices and turn them into numbers that influence the results. And if you could teach them how to do that, you'll set them up for success long term. As well as, if you could take anything away from the flexible dieting section here, setting food levels based on what someone is currently doing compared to where they should be is the smartest way to set macro and calorie targets versus just setting them based on what the textbook says they should. The gap between what they need to be doing and catching up on is going to be way too wide. Here are my final thoughts around things moving forward. there's many popular diets out there. It's good to get a sense of why they work and if there's any evidence to support using them for your clients. But we also need to keep into perspective where the client is coming from and how to navigate the conversations to see why it's in their best interest to take things to the next level and incorporate it into their lives. Through these conversations, that's where like coaching actually happens. This isn't like conflict. It isn't like black or white. Like that's where you get people to actually see what's important to them and the path forward. And that's what coaching is all about. And clients should leave feeling informed and motivated, regardless of what the path is, right? They should be excited about the next step. Now, hey guys, thanks for attending. This was a great webinar and I'm excited to dive into some questions here. I know we're a bit tight on time. If you want to learn more about what we do within the nutrition coaching space, we have a completely free 3-day quick start nutrition coaching challenge that'll show you everything you need to launch your business. We're talking about like templates, the approach, everything in terms of tracking and all that stuff. I'm going to drop it in the chat right here so that you have it. Check that out and then go from there. Okay. I have some time for some questions. Brad, it looks like you got a few here.
All right. Sorry, I'm just jumping back in. Just before we jump into the questions, we'll also include the link to the Quick Start Challenge in the email we send out as well with the recording and slides too. So you'll be able to take a look a little bit later on as well if you don't have the time right this minute.
Very cool.
All right.
Does anyone have any questions as we go through here? I know Brad had some comments and questions. Anissa, yeah, I mentioned that one carnivore diet wise in some of the aspects of it. Being carnivore diet in its premise is essentially the opposite of veganism, eating only animal-based foods. So many people will be eating. I would say it's like higher protein in most cases than conventional keto-based diet from a macronutrient composition. And I was talking to Rob before about this. I'm not sure it was on air or not, but in my experience, including plant-based foods and some fiber is a great thing in 99% of outcomes. It's not necessary for so many people. And there's different ways they come across this stuff for different reasons why they would start it. But in my experience, that'd be the one that I was like, it's just not necessary. Would be the biggest thing. There's more benefits to including plants, especially for most people, than they ever are excluding it. And that doesn't mean that you should avoid meat either. It just means that you should probably do both within the structure of what we know will get people results and improve their health outcomes. So that's my take on that. I'm not anti-meat, but I'm very anti-plant. Hopefully the antis are starting to cancel out and you just eat real food in the real amounts. Omar says, how do you deal with a client who still struggles with weight loss, even if they follow a structured diet? That's a great question. It comes down to, number one, and this is why I love coaching platforms like Everfit. Like if you know and you're managing the things that matter most within their goals, a lot of times making sure that they're adhering to that, not just saying they are, and taking a look at the data in terms of like calorie consumption, where those calories are coming from, and going from there, that'll allow us to come up with solutions that'll get them to stick to the things that matter for longer. So it would go back to, for me, it would go back to, even if they're following a structured diet and we know like what those numbers are, things probably need to be tweaked further, or they need to do it for a longer period of time. But that always comes back to actually managing and measuring what they're currently doing on an objective level.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't already, check out the other webinar that we hosted with Marc a few weeks ago around like strategies for fat loss. And there's some really good stuff in there, particularly around what to do when people are struggling, but seem to be following it. And like you said, obviously it's the consumption aspect, but I think also in that webinar, you talk a lot about getting that objective data on how much they're burning, and people often overestimating the number of calories they burn in a day and things like that. So it might not necessarily be the intake that's the problem. There's a lot of other factors at play.
Without a doubt. And making sure that they're controlling those things for long enough to see results. Everyone's going to be a little bit different in terms of like what actually happens there.
Cool. All right. Well, Yeah, I'll drop the link to the fat loss webinar in here. If you just jump on Everfit Academy, I'm putting that in the chat right now. It is currently front and center middle, nutrition strategies to boost fat loss results. There's a beautiful picture of Marc on the tile there as well. So should be easy to spot.
Did you doctor me up? Did you make me look good? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Hey, you send us the image. So.
That's great. That's great.
Sweet.
Cool.
Well, yeah, that, as I said, that just kind of wraps us up on time. If you do have any other questions or anything from Marc, in the email we send out too, we'll put his socials and things like that. So, feel free to reach out to him that way. Not to speak for you, Marc, but I know we've done this before and you're always happy to field questions and things like that. So
yeah, without a doubt, feel free to reach out, take me up on that challenge as well and dive into that. There's tons of good resources there. And please, reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Marc. And thank you everybody for coming. And yeah, we'll see you in the future.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Rob.